Prologue. The battlefield reeked of death. Carrion crows feasted upon the flesh of the fallen, their raucous cries mingling with the fading screams of the dying. The air was thick with the stench of blood, steel, and smoke, a miasma that clung to the remnants of a shattered warband. Broken banners lay strewn among splintered shields and sundered bodies, their once proud sigils obscured by gore. In the distance, a guttural chant rose as the victors celebrated their conquest. The warrior lay amidst the carnage, his crimson armor cracked and blackened from countless blows. His helm, crowned with jagged horns, had been ripped away, revealing a face carved by battle, a grim monument to violence and fury. A jagged spear of iron pierced his side, pinning him to the blood-soaked earth like a sacrificial offering. Above him loomed a figure clad in patched furs and scavenged plate, wielding a crude axe etched with crude symbols of power. The warlord's face was painted with ashen blood, his eyes gleaming with a savage light. Around him his warriors stood in a semicircle, their bodies bristling with the scars of countless raids. The warlord's lip curled in disdain as he pressed the tip of his axe against the warrior's throat. "Another madman wearing the colors of death," he growled, his voice as rough as grinding stones. "Tell me, slave of chaos, where is your god now? Does he answer your prayers as you lie here broken?" The warrior spat blood and barked a laugh, defiant despite his wounds. "Khorne answers in blood and slaughter. Your victory is his blessing, fool." The warlord's expression darkened. With a gesture, he ordered his men to drag the warrior to his feet. The defeated Chaos warrior's bindings were rough and crude, chains fashioned from scavenged links and tied together with leather thongs. Still, they held firm against his weakened body. "Take him to the camp," the warlord commanded. "We'll see if your blood god will save you from my blade." As the warband carried him away, the warrior gazed at the crimson-streaked sky, his lips curling into a faint smile. Even in chains, even in defeat, there was only one truth: blood would be spilled, and Khorne would reign. Chapter 1. Chains of Iron. The chains bit into his wrists as the warrior was dragged into the center of the camp, his boots scraping against the frozen dirt. Around him, the warlord's tribe had gathered, their harsh laughter and jeers filling the cold night air. Fires burned low in the iron braziers scattered throughout the clearing, casting flickering shadows across the crude wooden totems and rusted weapons. The warlord sat upon a throne cobbled together from the bones and shields of his enemies. It was crude but effective, a reflection of his brutal authority. He leaned forward, resting his massive axe across his lap, and motioned for silence. "Speak, dog of chaos," the warlord demanded, his tone laced with contempt. "Who are you to march against my warriors? What god do you grovel to? I see no power in you, only a broken wretch waiting to die." The warrior raised his head slowly, his eyes blazing with a defiance that seemed incongruous with his battered form. "I am no wretch," he growled, his voice hoarse but firm. "I am a chosen of Khorne, the blood god, the lord of skulls. My chains are nothing. My wounds are nothing. All that matters is the slaughter." "Khorne," the warlord spat, leaning back in his throne with a sneer. "Another false idol conjured by madmen. The old world is littered with your gods' corpses. If your so-called blood god was so mighty, why are you here, broken and bound, instead of standing victorious on the battlefield?" The warrior chuckled, the sound low and guttural, sending a ripple of unease through the gathered crowd. "You think victory is a measure of power," he rasped. "Every drop of blood spilled today, yours, mine, and theirs, was a tribute to him. Khorne does not care from where the blood flows, only that it does." The warlord's eyes narrowed as he studied the warrior. "You speak in riddles, chaos scum," he growled. "Perhaps I should send you to your god in pieces." The gathered warriors roared their approval, but the chaos warrior raised his voice over the din. "Kill me if you wish, warlord, but you would only feed his hunger further." He grinned, his teeth stained with blood. "Or perhaps you fear my god's wrath. You mock Khorne because you do not understand him, but I could teach you. Let me tell you of battles fought in his name, of the blood and skulls I have offered to him. Listen, and you will know the truth of war." The warlord leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "You think your tales can save you?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. The warrior met his gaze, unflinching. "Not save me. Delay my death, perhaps. But it is not I who will gain from this. My words are for you, Warlord. Mock me, mock Khorne if you will. But if you listen, you may find yourself drawn to his truth. For every warlord who has ever raised a blade, for every warrior who has ever spilled blood, they have served him, whether they know it or not." A heavy silence fell over the camp, broken only by the crackling of flames and the distant howling of wolves. The warlord snorted, his lips curling into a savage grin. "Very well, Chaos Dog. You will tell me these tales. Perhaps I'll even be entertained before I take your head." The warrior shifted in his chains, his voice ringing out with a grim conviction. "Then let me begin. Let me tell you of the Crimson Path, where my faith was forged in blood and fire." And so the tales began, the first of many, as the camp sat enthralled by the blood-soaked words of a man who sought to bring the name of Khorne to those who knew nothing of the blood god's wrath. Chapter 2. The Crimson Path. The firelight cast jagged shadows across the gathered warband as the Chaos Warrior sat, bloodied but unbowed, in his chains. The Warlord reclined on his makeshift throne, idly sharpening his axe with a stone, his expression hovering between curiosity and contempt. Around them, the warriors of the tribe listened in grim silence, their weapons resting loosely in their hands. The Chaos Warrior lifted his head, his eyes gleaming with a feral intensity. "You ask how I came to serve Khorne," he began, his voice low and rough like the grinding of stones. "It was not by choice. It was earned, wrenched from the throats of the unworthy. My initiation was a trial, a crucible of blood, where only those willing to embrace slaughter could survive." The warlord raised an eyebrow but said nothing, motioning for him to continue. The warrior's gaze seemed to drift into the past, his voice gaining a rhythmic cadence as he recounted the memory. "I was not born a servant of the blood god. I was a nameless wretch, a slave in the dungeons of a despot who ruled with an iron fist. He was a cruel man, a tyrant who believed himself untouchable. But even he feared the will of the gods. One day, emissaries from a Khorne-worshipping warband arrived at his gates, demanding tribute, not in gold, but in blood. The gathered warriors leaned closer, drawn to the vivid imagery of the tale. The despot, coward that he was, offered his slaves as fodder for their gladiatorial pits, hoping to sate the blood god's wrath. I was one of those slaves. We were herded like cattle into the fighting pits, stripped of our chains, and handed crude weapons. Above us, the warriors of Khorne roared their approval, their bloodlust palpable. They called it the Crimson Path, a trial to separate the worthy from the weak. The warrior's lips curled into a grim smile. There were 20 of us, and only one would leave the pit alive. The warlord snorted, his skepticism evident. "A common story among Chaos Dogs. Gladiatorial pits and bloodletting. You think I haven't heard this before? Every slave with a scar claims they crawled out of a massacre." The Chaos Warrior met the warlord's gaze unflinchingly. "Then listen, and you will know the truth. This was no ordinary trial. It was not merely a test of strength or skill, it was a test of faith. In the eyes of Khorne, only those who embrace slaughter with pure intent are worthy of survival." The warrior's voice grew darker as he continued. "The trial began with chaos. 20 bodies clashing, each desperate to survive. The air was thick with screams and the wet sounds of flesh meeting steel. Blood pooled at my feet, warm and sticky, as the first fell. I fought not with skill, but with the raw instinct of a cornered beast. I had no training, no technique, only rage." The crowd of warriors murmured among themselves, some smirking, others listening intently. "I wielded a rusted blade no better than a butcher's knife. My first kill was a man twice my size. He charged at me with a crude axe, thinking his strength alone would save him. I ducked under his swing and drove my blade into his belly. I didn't stop. I kept stabbing, even after he fell, until his insides spilled onto the sand." The Chaos Warrior's chains clinked as he leaned forward, his voice filled with grim pride. "That was the moment I understood. There is no glory in hesitation, no survival in mercy. The weak die. and the strong carved their names into the annals of blood. The warlord's expression remained skeptical, but there was a flicker of something else, perhaps recognition, perhaps envy. "And what makes this trial so different from any other battle?" he asked. "I've killed dozens, maybe hundreds, and yet I hear no gods whispering in my ear." The Chaos Warrior chuckled darkly, because it was not the killing alone that mattered. As the battle raged, I felt something awaken within me, a presence, a hunger that was not my own. Every drop of blood spilled, every scream, every death, it all fed that hunger. I could feel it growing, filling me with a strength I had never known. By the time the dust settled, I was the only one left standing. 20 souls offered to Khorne, and I was the vessel of their sacrifice. The warlord leaned forward, his axe resting on his knees. "And what of your captors? Did they reward you for your slaughter, or did they throw you back into chains like the dog you are now?" The Chaos Warrior's eyes burned with rage and satisfaction. "They gave me no reward. Khorne's favor is its own reward. They sent me into more battles, more trials, each more brutal than the last. But each time I fought, I felt his gaze upon me. Each time I bled, I felt his approval. I became more than a man, I became his instrument, a weapon forged in blood and wrath." The gathered warriors muttered among themselves, their expressions ranging from awe to scorn. The warlord's lips twisted into a smirk. "A fine story, Chaos Dog, but stories do not impress me. What proof do you have of this god of yours? What power does he grant, beyond your pitiful existence?" The Chaos Warrior met his gaze, unbowed. "You mock what you do not understand, Warlord. Khorne's power is not in promises or miracles. It is in the blood you spill, the rage you wield, and the skulls you offer. It is not I who must prove myself to you. It is you who must prove your worth to him." For a moment the fire crackled in the silence, the air heavy with tension. Then the warlord laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You've earned yourself another night, Chaos Dog. Let's see if your tales grow any more convincing before I decide what to do with you." The Chaos Warrior sat back, his chains clinking, a faint smile playing on his bloodied lips. He had survived another day, and the warlord's curiosity had been piqued. The first seeds of doubt had been sown, and he knew that doubt, like blood, was the beginning of the path to Khorne. Chapter 3. Battle Beneath the Black Moon. The fire crackled louder now, as if feeding on the growing tension in the camp. The warrior's eyes gleamed with something feral, something unholy, as he began his next tale. "It was a night without stars," the warrior said, his voice low, each word dripping with menace. "A black moon hung over the sky like a portent of doom. My Warband marched through the wilderness, the scent of beastmen thick in the air. They had raided the nearby villages, slaughtering the weak in their mindless frenzy. But it was their blood that would be offered to Khorne that night." The warlord tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. Beastmen, savage brutes, but hardly a worthy tale. What made this battle so special? The warrior grinned, his teeth glinting in the firelight, because it was not a battle of men and beasts. It was a massacre, a frenzy beyond mortal comprehension. Khorne himself took notice. He gestured with his bound hands, his voice rising. "We were outnumbered, 200 beastmen to our 50. They came with their horns and claws, their crude axes and gnarled spears. But we had something greater. As they charged, bellowing their war cries, I felt it, a rage unlike any other, a fire that consumed every thought, every fear. Khorne's blessing was upon me, Warlord, and in that moment, I was no longer a man. I was a weapon of slaughter." The warband fell silent, the weight of his words pressing upon them. "I do not remember the first kill," the warrior admitted, his voice almost reverent. "All I remember is the blood, hot, sticky, spraying across my armor. I felt no pain, no fatigue, only the endless hunger for more. My axe cleaved through horns, bone, and muscle alike. I ripped out throats with my bare hands. My Warband followed me, their bloodlust ignited by my frenzy. We became one with the night, a tide of crimson that drowned the beasts." The warlord leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped his axe. "And you claim this was Khorne's doing?" I claim nothing, the warrior said, his voice a growl. I know it. I felt his presence, Warlord. With every skull I claimed, I felt his approval. When the last beastman fell, I stood atop a mountain of corpses, and for a moment, the black moon turned red. It was his sign, his blessing. That night, my warband became his chosen. The warlord's expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with a quiet intensity. A convenient tale. But if your god truly blessed you, where is your warband now? The warrior's smile faded, replaced by a grim look. Gone. They fell as all warriors must, feeding Khorne's endless hunger. Blood is the price of power, Warlord. The weak are cold, and the strong rise in their place. Perhaps that is why I am here, bound before you. Khorne cares not for my pride or my survival. He cares only for blood. The warlord rose to his feet, towering over the bound warrior. Your tales stir the blood, chaos scum, but they are only tales. If this Khorne of yours truly exists, he will not save you from my axe. The warrior met his gaze, unflinching. Perhaps not. But know this, Warlord, if you strike me down, you will not escape him. Khorne's eye is upon you, whether you believe it or not. Every drop of blood spilled, every life taken, feeds his power. Kill me, and you will be his. The warlord stared down at him, his hand tightening around the haft of his axe. For a moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of wolves. Then, with a grunt, the warlord stepped back. Your tales amuse me, chaos dog. Continue. But if your words are lies, I will carve your heart out myself. The warrior chuckled darkly, settling back against his chains. Oh, warlord, he said, his voice dripping with grim satisfaction. You will see. Let me tell you of the blood tithe. Chapter 4. The Blood Tithe. The campfire crackled in the still night air, casting flickering shadows on the faces of the gathered warriors. The Chaos Warrior sat in the dirt, chains rattling with his every movement, but his voice was steady and filled with grim reverence. His words carried the weight of blood-soaked conviction, drawing the warlord's full attention, even as the shaman lurking in the shadows grew restless. In Khorne's service, war is never truly over, the warrior began, his eyes glinting like smoldering coals. To follow the blood god is to embrace the eternal battle. It is not enough to kill your enemies. The very act must honor him, must sing his praises. Weakness must be purged, and blood must be spilled. For Khorne does not care from where the blood flows, only that it does. The gathered warriors listened intently, their expressions flickering between fascination and unease. The warlord, seated upon his crude throne, leaned forward, resting his chin on a scarred fist. Speak plainly, chaos dog, he growled. What price does your god demand? What does he take in return for the strength you claim he grants? The chaos warrior's gaze hardened. The price of strength is blood, always blood. The unworthy must fall so the strong can rise. Even in victory, the tithe must be paid. He paused, his voice dropping into a guttural snarl. After each battle, we offer the fallen to Khorne, both enemy and ally alike. Their skulls are his, their blood his nourishment. The warband muttered among themselves, uneasy whispers rippling through the circle. The idea of spilling the blood of their own was alien to them, even in their brutal existence. The shaman, cloaked in shadow, finally stepped forward, his voice sharp and accusing. You dare speak of slaughtering your own kin as if it is virtue, he spat. This is madness, not devotion. A parasite god that demands endless death is no god at all. The chaos warrior smirked, his amusement at the shaman's outburst clear. Khorne has no use for cowards who cling to life as you do, shaman. You fear the blood god because you know you are not strong enough to meet his demands. The shaman hissed, stepping closer to the warlord. My lord, this creature seeks only to sow discord among us. His words are poison. He would see us turn on one another until none are left to stand against his chaos masters. The warlord waved a dismissive hand, silencing the shaman. Let him speak. His tales amuse me. Besides, what harm can his words do? The chaos warrior seized the opportunity, his voice rising with fervor. Let me tell you of a battle where the blood tithe was paid in full. After we crushed a rival warband, I led my brothers in stacking the skulls of our fallen atop the slain enemies. It was not mere ritual, it was tribute, an offering to Khorne himself. As we drenched the ground in blood and chanted his name, we felt his presence. His eyes burned as he spoke, his voice trembling with awe. The very air grew heavy, filled with the power of wrath and glory. We became more than men, we became extensions of his will. The warriors in the circle exchanged glances, unease mingling with something darker, fascination. The warlord sat silently, his expression unreadable, but his grip on the haft of his axe tightened. "And what became of those who refused this tribute?" he asked, his tone deceptively calm. "They were weak," the Chaos Warrior replied bluntly. "Khorne has no place for those who hesitate. Those who would not take part in the bloodletting were slaughtered alongside the enemy. Their weakness fed his glory." The shaman erupted in fury. "This is a lie. No god demands such madness. This is not honor, it is butchery." The Chaos Warrior turned his gaze on the shaman, his expression cold and unyielding. "Honor is earned in blood. Do you think your spells and charms protect this warband? Khorne cares not for magic or words, only steel blood and strength hold meaning. You are nothing to him, a pale shadow that clings to life because it fears the truth." The warlord raised a hand, silencing both men. His voice cut through the tension like the swing of an axe. "Enough. I have heard your tale, Chaos Dog, and I'll hear more of this, Khorne." His eyes flicked to the shaman, his expression hard. "But make no mistake, shaman, you will not interrupt again." The shaman stepped back, his face a mask of barely contained fury. The Chaos Warrior's smirk returned, triumphant. The seeds of discord had been sown, and he could see the warlord's growing curiosity. Every drop of blood spilled in the days to come, whether in battle, in execution, or in the quiet betrayal of one's kin, would be a tribute to Khorne. The blood god was patient. The tithe would be paid. Chapter 5. Rage Unbound. The fires burned low in the Warband's camp, casting flickering shadows across the gathered warriors. The air carried the pungent scent of blood and sweat, mingling with the earthy tang of the night. The Chaos Warrior sat in his chains, his eyes blazing as he began another tale, his voice as sharp and cutting as the axe that once cleaved through his enemies. "There was a time," he began, "when I walked among the weak. They wore the guise of strength, bore weapons of iron, and sang songs of battle, but their hearts were hollow. They feared pain, they feared sacrifice, and so I gave them what Khorne demands from all cowards, death." The warlord leaned forward on his crude bone throne, his intrigue barely hidden beneath his mask of disdain. "An entire tribe wiped out for fear?" he asked mockingly. "Did their death feed your blood god, or was it your pride that demanded their skulls?" The warrior smiled, a grim and humorless expression. "Khorne cares not for pride. He cares for blood. It matters not if the foe is strong or weak, so long as they are slain. But hear the tale, warlord, and you may understand." He shifted in his chains, the flicker of the flames dancing on his battered armor. They were allies once, a neighboring tribe of marauders who called themselves the Sons of the Iron Fang. We joined forces to raid a distant imperial fort, one whose walls were said to be unbreachable. But as we marched toward the fortress, the whispers began, whispers of doubt. The Iron Fang's warriors muttered about the strength of the walls, the sharpness of the Empire's steel. I saw fear infect their ranks like a sickness, spreading from one weak heart to the next. The warriors around the fire listened intently, some nodding in silent agreement as he spoke of fear as a poison. Even the warlord's lips curled in a faint smile, though he said nothing. We reached the outskirts of the fortress under the shadow of twilight. The warrior continued. Our warband was prepared for slaughter. I could feel Khorne's gaze upon us, his hunger growing as our bloodlust boiled. But the Sons of the Iron Fang, they faltered. Their chieftain, a man who called himself Tharok the Grim, hesitated. He ordered his warriors to hold back, to wait for nightfall, claiming it was strategy. But I saw the truth. He was afraid. He feared the walls, the soldiers, even the blood we had come to spill. Fear, warlord, is the greatest blasphemy against Khorne. It is weakness incarnate, an insult to the god who demands unrelenting war. "And what did you do?" the warlord asked, his voice low, his fingers tightening on the haft of his axe. The warrior's grin widened, savage and wild. "I gave Tharok and his tribe a choice, fight or die. Their cowardice had already damned them in the eyes of the blood god, and I would not let them stain the glory of our assault with their weakness. When they refused to march, I turned my axe on Tharok and carved his head from his shoulders." A gasp rippled through the gathered warband, but none dared interrupt. The warrior's voice grew louder, filled with an almost religious fervor. "The sons of the Iron Fang turned on me then, their fear replaced with desperate rage. But rage born of fear is hollow, empty. I cut them down, one by one, until the snow was black with their blood. Khorne's name was on my lips with every strike, and as the last of them fell, I felt his presence. The blood god rewards strength, Warlord, and scorns the weak. That night I stood among the corpses of Tharok's tribe and raised their skulls as an offering. In Khorne's gaze, it burned brighter than ever." The warlord's warriors murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads, others nodding with approval. The shaman, seated a few steps away from the throne, spoke up for the first time. "This tale reeks of madness," he hissed, his voice thin and sharp. "What warrior would destroy his own allies for mere hesitation? Such wanton slaughter is not strength, it is chaos. Beware his words, chieftain. They twist the mind, turning brother against brother." The warlord's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking from the shaman to the chaos warrior. "Silence, shaman," he snapped. "This is no time for your babbling." Turning back to the chained warrior, he said, "Your story is one of treachery, not strength. Even a cowardly tribe serves a purpose in war, if only as meat for the slaughter." The chaos warrior laughed, a sound as raw as the tearing of flesh. "And that is where you are wrong, warlord. Khorne does not want the unworthy to live. Weakness infects the strong, and mercy is the first step toward ruin. You may not see it yet, but Khorne's truth is this: to be strong, you must destroy the weak, even if they are your own. For strength is the only virtue worth honoring, and blood is the only currency that matters." The warlord leaned back, stroking his beard, as he considered the words. "Perhaps there is some truth in your madness," he admitted, his voice a low rumble. "But tell me this, warrior. If I were to falter, would you raise your axe against me as well?" The chaos warrior met his gaze, his eyes glinting like embers in the firelight. "Without hesitation," he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "But I see no weakness in you, warlord. Only strength waiting to be tested." The warlord grunted, a sound that could have been approval or disdain. "We shall see," he said, rising from his throne. "But your tales, they stir something in me. This god of yours, this Khorne, perhaps he is not so different from the forces we already serve. Perhaps all blood flows to him in the end." The chaos warrior said nothing, but the faint smile on his lips spoke volumes. Chapter 6. The Price of Power. The campfire crackled, its flames clawing at the frigid night air, as the chaos warrior leaned forward in his chains. His battered armor gleamed faintly in the flickering light, a crimson hue that seemed to pulse with the same intensity as the words that poured from his lips. "In every warband, there are those who seek to twist Khorne's gifts to their own ends," he began, his voice low and menacing. "Fools who think they can barter with the Lord of Skulls as if he were some petty merchant god, or harness his might through trickery. But Khorne has no patience for deceit. His wrath is swift, and his judgment is absolute." The gathered warriors shifted uneasily, their gazes darting toward the camp's shaman, who sat silently at the edge of the firelight, their features partially obscured by the deep hood of their robes. The warlord noticed the tension but said nothing, his sharp eyes fixed on the chaos warrior. "It happened not long after I pledged myself fully to Khorne," the warrior continued. "Our warband had grown strong, its numbers swollen with deserters, brigands, and others drawn by the promise of bloodshed and plunder. Among them was a sorcerer, a man who called himself Draven the Black. He wore the trappings of power, robes of crimson and ebony, talismans carved from bone, but his heart was craven. He sought to wield Khorne's fury, to tame it, and bend it to his will. But Khorne does not serve. Khorne commands. The warlord's brow furrowed. Sorcery? In the service of a god of blood and battle? I thought your kind scorned such weakness. The Chaos warrior nodded grimly. We do. Khorne despises magic, for it is the tool of cowards and deceivers, those who seek to avoid the purity of combat. Draven claimed his spells were a tribute to the blood god, that he would summon forth storms of fire and ruin to aid us in battle. At first, it seemed as though he spoke the truth. When we marched against the marauding trolls of the Ironmaw Fens, Draven's fire rained from the sky, scouring the beasts and clearing a path for our axes. And yet he fell, the warlord asked, his tone sharp with curiosity. How does one so powerful meet his end? The Chaos warrior's lips curled into a grim smile. Power without faith is hollow, warlord. Draven's magic was not born of devotion, but arrogance. He believed he could rise above Khorne's judgment, that he could take the blood god's gifts without offering the blood price. He was wrong. He paused, letting his words hang in the air before continuing. It was during the Battle of Blackfang Crag, where we faced a horde of Skaven. Their filth swarmed around us, their chittering cries echoing through the mountain pass. We were outnumbered 10-1, our shields buckling beneath their endless assault. Draven stood atop the ridge, chanting his incantations, promising salvation through his flames. But his fire burned too long, too fiercely. It did not distinguish between ally and enemy. The screams of my brothers filled the air as they were consumed by his magic, their skulls denied to Khorne's throne. A growl of anger rippled through the warlord's warriors, their hatred of magic deeply ingrained in their savage hearts. Even the warlord's expression darkened, his grip tightening on the haft of his axe. That was when I knew Draven's blasphemy could not go unpunished. The Chaos warrior said, his voice rising with fervor. Khorne demands battle, not cowardice. He demands bloodshed by steel, not conjured by sorcery. I ascended the ridge, cutting through Skaven and flame alike, and challenged Draven before the blood god's gaze. He laughed at me, warlord. A laugh born of his arrogance, his belief that his magic could shield him from Khorne's wrath. The Chaos warrior's eyes burned like embers as he spoke the next words. But Khorne's judgment was already upon him. The sky grew dark, the air heavy with the stench of blood and fury. Draven raised his hands to cast another spell, and that was when it happened. His body imploded. His flesh twisted inward, his bones shattering as if crushed by an unseen hand. His screams echoed through the crag, a symphony of torment, as his skull was wrenched from his body by Khorne's will and added to the eternal throne. A hush fell over the gathered warriors. Even the warlord seemed momentarily taken aback by the vivid description of divine punishment. The shaman, however, bristled with visible unease, their hands gripping their staff tightly. That is Khorne's law, the Chaos warrior said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. He has no need for sorcery, no patience for lies. Only the strong, those who wield their strength in honest battle, are worthy of his favor. Draven thought himself above the blood god's wrath. He was wrong, and his skull now adorns the skull throne as a reminder. The warlord leaned back in his crude throne, his gaze shifting briefly to the shaman. "And what of you, sorcerer?" he asked, his tone dangerously calm. "Would you be so foolish as to test this blood god's wrath as Draven did?" The shaman stiffened, their voice wavering as they replied. I serve the tribe, my lord. My spells have aided you in battle, protected you from harm. I have never claimed to serve any god, nor sought to defy their will." The warlord's eyes narrowed, doubt flickering in their depths. "Perhaps. But I have seen you falter in battle, shaman. I have seen hesitation in your steps, fear in your eyes. Perhaps the blood god sees it too." The shaman said nothing, their silence louder than any protest. Around the fire, the warriors began to whisper, their faith in the shaman shaken by the Chaos warrior's tale. As the Chaos warrior sat back in his chains, a faint, knowing smile played across his bloodied lips. "Fear and doubt have no place in Khorne's domain," he said, his voice low and ominous. "The weak will always fall, warlord. The only question is when." The warlord's gaze lingered on the shaman for a long moment before turning back to the fire. He said nothing, but the weight of his silence spoke volumes. The shaman, for the first time in years, felt the cold, sharp edge of doubt cut into their heart. Chapter 7. The Red Horizon. The Chaos Warrior's eyes gleamed like molten iron in the firelight, his voice steady yet burning with a fervor that seemed to infect the air itself. Around him, the Warband sat rapt, their gazes fixed on the prisoner whose words dripped with violence and conviction. Even the Warlord, perched on his throne of bones and iron, leaned forward, his fingers tapping lightly on the haft of his axe as he listened. This tale, the warrior began, is of a day when the sky itself seemed to bleed, a day when faith in Khorne carried my warband to glory against an enemy that thought themselves invincible. We called it the Battle of the Red Horizon, though its name mattered little in the end. All that mattered was the slaughter. The gathered warriors murmured their approval at the word, their bloodlust barely restrained. The warrior's smile was grim as he continued. It was an imperial garrison, nestled in a fort of stone and iron atop a high hill. 100 men held it, soldiers of the Empire, clad in steel and faith. Their banners bore the twin-tailed comet, their priests preached of Sigmar's might, and their cannons stood ready to turn any who approached into ash. The villagers who lived below them whispered that the fort was impenetrable, that no army could take it. He chuckled darkly, the sound rumbling in his chest. Impenetrable. Such words are spoken by those who have never faced true faith, the kind that Khorne inspires. My warband was small, barely 50 men, but each of us burned with the fury of the blood god. We were not soldiers, Warlord. We were berserkers, reavers, killers who sought only to drown the hill in blood and pile the skulls high in offering. One of the Warband warriors leaned closer, his voice hoarse with curiosity. 50 against 100 in a fortress. How could you hope to win? The Chaos Warrior fixed the speaker with a fiery glare. Hope is for the weak. There was no hope, only faith. Faith that Khorne would see our bloodlust, our ferocity, and grant us victory. Faith that the sound of 100 dying screams would echo us the brass throne. That is what carried us forward, not plans, not strategy, but pure, unrelenting rage. The Warlord nodded slightly, his lips curling into a faint smile. Go on, he said. Tell us how your faith overcame stone walls and steel blades. The Chaos Warrior leaned back, his voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing the others to listen closely. We waited until dusk. The sky turned red as the sun sank behind the hills, the horizon glowing like an open wound. It was then that Khorne's blessing fell upon us, Warlord. It was not a vision or a voice, no. Khorne speaks in the language of war. He speaks in the thunder of charging feet and the scream of steel meeting flesh. As the light faded, we charged. The warrior's voice rose, mirroring the ferocity of the memory. Their cannons roared, but they were too slow. Their guns fired, but they could not pierce the will of the blood god. We climbed the hill like wolves, our axes gleaming with the promise of slaughter. When we reached their walls, we tore down their gates with sheer strength, smashing through iron and timber, as if possessed. The shaman, sitting apart from the group, scoffed softly. A convenient tale, they muttered, though their voice wavered with unease. No mortal strength can break an iron gate. The Chaos Warrior turned his gaze on the shaman, his smile savage. It was not mortal strength, sorcerer. It was Khorne's strength. When you fight in his name, when you let his fury consume you, there are no gates, no walls, no barriers that can withstand you. His eyes returned to the Warlord and his warriors. We poured into the fort like a flood, our roars drowning out their prayers. I remember the fear in their eyes, the way they clutched their holy symbols, as if they could protect them. It was beautiful. We cut them down, their blood spraying across the stone, their skulls rolling beneath our feet. It was chaos, Warlord, and in that chaos Khorne reigned supreme. The warriors around the fire shifted restlessly, their hands gripping their weapons as if they could feel the echoes of the battle through his words. Even the Warlord's grip on his axe tightened, his expression unreadable. And when the last of them fell, the Chaos Warrior continued, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. We did what must always be done. We gathered their skulls, stripping them of flesh, and built a great mound in the center of the fort, a tribute to Khorne, a monument to his glory. And then we burned the fort to the ground. The flames reached high into the sky, a beacon of blood and fire that called to the blood god. That night, as we stood among the ashes, I felt his gaze upon us, heavy and hot. He was pleased, Warlord, pleased with the blood we spilled, the skulls we offered, the chaos we sowed. The camp fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire. The Warband's warriors exchanged glances, their bloodlust stirred to a fever pitch by the tail. Some whispered of raiding the nearby villages, while others simply tightened their grips on their axes, eager for battle. The warlord's gaze remained fixed on the chaos warrior, his expression thoughtful. "You speak of faith as if it were a weapon," he said finally. "But what you describe, it is not faith. It is madness." And yet, he trailed off, his eyes scanning the restless faces of his warriors. Perhaps madness has its place in war. The Chaos Warrior's smile widened, his teeth glinting in the firelight. "Madness, Warlord? Call it what you will. But know this, Khorne rewards those who embrace it. He rewards those who give themselves fully to the slaughter, who seek only to spill blood and take skulls in his name. Your warriors feel it, even now. The call of battle, the hunger for glory. Listen to it, Warlord. Let it guide you, as it has guided me." The Warlord rose from his throne, his axe glinting in the firelight as he looked out over his warband. "Enough stories for tonight," he said, though his voice lacked its usual commanding edge. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we march." The warriors dispersed reluctantly, their excitement palpable. The shaman lingered near the fire, casting a wary glance at the Chaos Warrior before retreating into the shadows. The Warlord remained for a moment, staring into the flames, his mind clearly weighed down by the warrior's words. As the camp settled into uneasy quiet, the Chaos Warrior sat back in his chains, his smile never faltering. He knew the seed had been planted. It was only a matter of time before the Warlord's thirst for blood and Khorne's truth became undeniable. Chapter 8. The Chainbreaker. The camp was restless. The stories of slaughter and glory told by the Chaos Warrior had stirred something primal in the Warband, an undercurrent of bloodlust that no amount of ale or rest could soothe. Weapons were sharpened with more care than usual, and idle chatter had turned to boasts of battles yet to be fought. The Warlord's warriors were growing impatient for blood, their restless eyes turning toward their leader for direction. Bound by his chains, the Chaos Warrior sat near the dimming campfire, his presence a constant reminder of the tales that had ignited the Warband's fervor. Though his body was battered, his spirit remained unbroken, and his voice carried a weight that seemed to demand attention even when he whispered. The Warlord sat across from him, his axe resting against his knee, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. For the first time since the Chaos Warrior's capture, he did not mock or sneer. He simply listened, his silence betraying an unease that he did not fully understand. "Chains," the Chaos Warrior began, his voice low but clear, "are a fitting punishment for cowards and slaves. But they are also a test of whether one has the strength to break them or the weakness to accept them." The Warlord's gaze snapped toward the warrior, his eyes narrowing. "You speak in riddles again, Chaos Dog. Are you mocking me?" The warrior's lips curled into a faint smile. "I mock no one, Warlord. I only speak of truth. Chains are not just iron links that bind the flesh. They are fear, doubt, hesitation. They are the weights we carry that hold us back from true glory. Khorne despises chains because they are the trappings of weakness, the mark of those who would submit rather than fight." The Warlord's grip on his axe tightened, his knuckles white against the leather-wrapped haft. "And yet you sit here bound like a slave, preaching of strength and freedom. What does that make you?" "A test?" the Chaos Warrior replied without hesitation. "For you, Warlord, a test of your resolve. My chains are no shame to me, for I will break them in time. Khorne's gaze does not falter, and he knows that even now I serve him. But you," he let the words linger, his eyes boring into the Warlord. "What chains bind you?" The warlord scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "I am no slave, nor am I bound. I am the master of this warband, and my word is law." "Are you?" the warrior asked, tilting his head slightly. "Or are you a slave to the past? To the memory of dead gods who offer you nothing? To traditions that keep you and your warriors chained to weakness and aimlessness?" The warband warriors, who had been lingering nearby, grew silent, their attention drawn to the charged exchange. Even the shaman, ever watchful in the shadows, leaned closer, their hooded face betraying a flicker of unease. "You dare question my strength?" the warlord growled, rising to his feet. His axe gleamed in the firelight, its edge sharp enough to cleave bone. "I have led my warriors to countless victories. I have spilled blood enough to drown the weak. Do not mistake your chains for safety, chaos scum. I could end you with a single stroke." The chaos warrior did not flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, the flickering fire casting eerie shadows across his battered features. "Strength is not measured by the victories of the past, warlord. It is measured by the battles yet to be fought. You lead your warriors to slaughter, yes, but for what purpose? What do you offer them beyond the fleeting satisfaction of a single battle? My God demands more than survival. He demands eternal war. He demands glory. And you could offer that to your warriors, if only you would break your chains." The warlord froze, his axe hovering in the air. For a long moment he said nothing, his face a mask of anger and uncertainty. Around him, his warriors exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and growing discontent. The shaman stepped forward, their voice sharp and brittle. "Enough of this poison," they hissed. "His words sow discord, my lord. He seeks to undermine your authority and turn your warriors against you. Kill him now, and be done with his lies." The warlord turned toward the shaman, his eyes narrowing. "And what do you offer me, shaman? Your spells, your whispers of guidance, have they brought us anything but fleeting victories in the same hollow existence?" The shaman faltered, their words catching in their throat. The warlord's gaze swept over his warband, seeing the restlessness in their eyes, the barely restrained hunger for something greater. He looked back at the chaos warrior, who sat calmly in his chains, as though he had already won the battle without raising a blade. "You speak of purpose," the warlord said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "But purpose is not so easily found. If I am to break my chains, as you say, then what does Khorne demand of me?" The chaos warrior's smile widened, his teeth glinting in the firelight. "Blood, skulls, war eternal. He demands that you cast aside hesitation and weakness, that you embrace the only truth that matters, strength. Every battle, every drop of blood spilled, every skull claimed for his throne brings you closer to his favor. Khorne rewards those who act without doubt, who live for the slaughter and the glory it brings." The warlord lowered his axe slowly, his expression thoughtful. Around the fire, his warriors stirred, their bloodlust stoked by the warrior's words. Even the shaman, for all their protestations, could feel the tide shifting. The warlord was no longer the same man he had been before the chaos warrior had begun to speak. "I will think on this," the warlord said at last, his voice quieter now. "But if your God is real, warrior, and if his path is as you claim, then perhaps it is not I who must break my chains, but all of us." The chaos warrior said nothing, but his grin deepened, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a seed planted in fertile ground. The warlord turned and strode away, his mind heavy with thoughts he could not yet voice. Behind him, the camp buzzed with quiet whispers, the beginnings of a storm that would not be easily calmed. The chains that bound the chaos warrior remained intact, but they no longer mattered. He had begun to break the chains that truly mattered, the ones around the warlord's heart. It was only a matter of time before they shattered completely, and the blood would flow once more. Chapter 9. The Trial of the Skull Throne. The campfire burned brighter that night, as if the flames themselves hungered for the tale to come. The chaos warrior sat in his chains, the flickering light casting strange shadows on his bloodied armor. Around him, the warband had gathered closer than ever before, their bloodlust now tempered by a gnawing curiosity. Even the warlord sat forward on his crude throne, his axe resting across his knees, his expression unreadable but intent. The warrior's voice, low and resonant, cut through the night air. There comes a time for every servant of Khorne when their faith is tested, not by battle alone, but by the gaze of the blood god himself. It is a trial few survive. For Khorne's demands are absolute. He does not care for words or promises, only for blood spilled and strength proven, and those who falter are unmade. The warband's murmur stilled, their attention riveted as the warrior began his tale. It was after I had slain Gralvik the Gore-touched, a rival champion who had defied Khorne's will. He was mighty, his strength undeniable, but he was also a liar, a deceiver. He claimed Khorne's favor, but used cowards' tricks, poisons, ambushes, sorcery, to claim his victories. Such deceit is an affront to Khorne, who values only honest brutality, and so I challenged him. The warrior's gaze swept over the gathered crowd, his tone sharpening. The duel was fierce, our axes ringing like thunder in the air. Gralvik was strong, yes, but strength means nothing without faith. My fury consumed him, and with a single swing, I cleaved his skull in two. His blood sprayed high, painting the ground red, and I raised his shattered head to the heavens, offering it to the blood god. A wicked grin spread across his face as he continued. That was when the trial began. The air grew heavy, the sky darkened, and the battlefield trembled. From the gore-soaked earth, a figure emerged, a demon of Khorne, wreathed in flame and shadow. Its body was a mountain of muscle and rage, its eyes burning like molten brass. Its voice shook the very ground as it spoke. You have slain in my lord's name, but words are hollow things. Prove your worth. The warlord narrowed his eyes, his fingers drumming against the haft of his axe. And what did this daemon demand of you? The chaos warrior's smile deepened, his eyes gleaming with unholy fervor. It demanded that I kneel, not in submission, but in acceptance of Khorne's law. It demanded that I offer up the truth of my soul, every doubt, every weakness, every lie I had ever told myself. And it demanded that I prove my devotion with a final test. The warriors around the fire leaned closer, their breaths shallow. The shaman, standing at the edge of the circle, shifted uncomfortably, their staff gripped tightly in trembling hands. The test was this, the warrior said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing the others to strain to hear. The daemon summoned forth two of my own warband, men who had fought beside me for years. One was my blood brother, a warrior I had trusted with my life. The other was a coward who had fled in battle but had hidden his weakness behind oaths of loyalty. The daemon demanded I choose one to die. A ripple of shock passed through the gathered warriors. Even the warlord's expression darkened as he asked, "And which did you choose?" The chaos warrior's eyes burned like coals in the firelight. The coward, of course. Khorne has no use for liars, no tolerance for deceit. I drove my axe into his chest without hesitation, and the daemon roared its approval. But the test was not over. As the coward's blood pooled at my feet, the demon turned to my blood brother and said, "Strike him down, or you will share his fate." The warriors around the fire gasped, and one muttered, "Khorne demands even the strongest ties to be severed." The chaos warrior nodded grimly. That is his way. My blood brother hesitated, and in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I killed him, not out of hatred, but because hesitation is weakness, and weakness is death. The daemon laughed, its voice shaking the heavens, and declared that I had passed the trial. "You are worthy," it said. "Go forth and spill blood in his name." And then it vanished, leaving me standing alone among the bodies of those I had once called brothers. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The warlord's warriors exchanged uneasy glances, their faith in their leader now tinged with doubt. The shaman stepped forward, their voice sharp and trembling. "This is madness," they hissed. "No god demands such cruelty, such betrayal. These tales are lies meant to turn us against each other." The chaos warrior turned his gaze to the shaman, his smile cold and mocking. "Lies? Khorne hates lies more than anything, sorcerer. You, who claim to guide this warband, what truth do you offer? Do your words lead them to glory, or do they keep them bound in chains of doubt and weakness?" The shaman recoiled as if struck, their mouth opening and closing without sound. The warlord's eyes narrowed as he looked at the shaman, the seed of doubt planted in his mind, now taking root. "You've guided us with your spells and whispers, shaman," the warlord said slowly, his voice dangerously calm. "But where have you led us? Have we grown stronger under your guidance, or have we merely survived?" "My lord," the shaman stammered, their voice cracking, "I have only ever acted in the best interests of the tribe." "Enough," the warlord snapped, cutting them off. He rose to his feet, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the shaman. "You speak of acting for the tribe, but I wonder, is it the tribe you serve, or yourself?" The Chaos Warrior said nothing, but his smile widened as he watched the shaman's mask of confidence crumble. The warlord turned to his warriors, his voice rising. "Perhaps it is time we found a new purpose, a higher purpose. A purpose that does not rely on sorcery or whispers in the dark. Khorne's path is brutal, yes, but it is clear. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne." The warband roared their approval, their bloodlust ignited by the warlord's words. The shaman shrank back into the shadows, their position as spiritual guide now teetering on the brink of collapse. As the Chaos Warrior sat back in his chains, his grin burned brighter than the fire. The warlord had begun to see the truth. The skull throne awaited, and its call was impossible to ignore. Chapter 10. Seeds of Betrayal. The camp had become a crucible of tension, simmering just below the surface, as the Chaos Warriors' tales continued to spread like wildfire among the warband. The warriors, once content to follow their warlord without question, now gathered in quiet clusters, their whispered conversations filled with talk of Khorne, bloodshed, and glory beyond mere survival. The shaman, long regarded as the spiritual guide of the warband, now found their position threatened by the Chaos Warriors' influence. Sitting in his chains, the Chaos Warrior smirked as he watched the warriors sharpening their blades with a newfound fervor. They had begun to chant words of Khorne's creed under their breath, phrases like "blood for the blood god" and "skulls for the skull throne," slipping into their daily routines. The shaman, standing at the edge of the firelight, could barely contain their anger as they observed the growing unrest. The warlord, seated on his throne of bones, sensed the unease but remained silent, his sharp eyes flicking between the shaman and the warrior. Though he had yet to openly declare his stance, it was clear to all that he was wrestling with the truths the Chaos Warrior had sown in his mind. It was the shaman who finally broke the silence. "My lord," the shaman said, their voice quivering with barely concealed frustration, "this has gone on long enough. Every word this blasphemer speaks sows dissent among your warriors. His lies twist their hearts, turning them against you and the traditions that have guided us for generations. He must be silenced now, before it is too late." The warlord turned his gaze to the shaman, his expression unreadable. "Silenced," he repeated slowly. "You fear his words, shaman." The shaman stepped forward, their staff rattling with charms and fetishes as they pointed it accusingly at the Chaos Warrior. "I fear nothing, my lord. But I see the poison he spreads. He speaks of his blood god, a monstrous being who demands endless slaughter. He seeks to turn your warriors into mindless beasts, driven by madness instead of purpose." The Chaos Warrior laughed, the sound low and guttural, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Mindless beasts. Is that what you see, shaman?" He turned his burning gaze to the gathered warriors, his voice rising. "Do you feel mindless, brothers? Or do you feel alive for the first time? Do you feel the call of battle in your veins, the promise of glory in every drop of blood spilled?" The warriors murmured their agreement, their voices growing louder as the warriors' words ignited their passions. The shaman's face darkened, their grip on the staff tightening. "My lord," the shaman said again, their voice sharper now. "He is manipulating them, manipulating you. His god is a liar, and so is he. If you do not act, his poison will destroy everything you have built." The warlord's gaze lingered on the shaman for a moment, before shifting to the Chaos Warrior. "And you," he said, his tone cold and even. "What do you say to this? Are you poisoning my warband, as the shaman claims?" The Chaos Warrior met the Warlord's gaze without flinching. Khorne does not deal in lies, Warlord. Lies are the tools of cowards and sorcerers, of those who lack the strength to face their enemies in open battle. His eyes flicked briefly to the shaman, his meaning unmistakable. Khorne's truth is simple. Strength is all that matters, and blood is the only price worth paying. "You see," the shaman snarled, stepping closer to the Warlord. "He twists your mind with half-truths, wrapping his madness in the guise of strength. He must be silenced before." "Enough," the Warlord said, his voice cutting through the rising tension like a thunderclap. He stood from his throne, his axe glinting in the firelight as he turned to the shaman. "I will decide what is true and what is poison. You will not interrupt me again, shaman." The shaman froze, their face a mask of disbelief. "My lord, you cannot mean to." "I mean to hear him out," the Warlord interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. He turned back to the Chaos Warrior, his expression hard. "You will finish your tale, and when you do, I will decide what to do with you." The Chaos Warrior inclined his head slightly, his chains rattling. "As you wish, Warlord. But know this, the truth of Khorne cannot be denied. Not by you, not by your warriors, and certainly not by a trembling sorcerer who hides behind charms and whispers." The Warlord returned to his seat, his eyes narrowing, as he watched the shaman retreat into the shadows, their anger and fear palpable. Around the fire, the warriors leaned in, eager to hear the Chaos Warrior's next tale. The seeds of rebellion had been sown, and the Chaos Warrior knew that they would soon bear fruit. The shaman, for all their power and cunning, was losing their grip on the Warband, and as the Chaos Warrior's influence grew, the Warlord himself began to shift, his thoughts darkening with the realization that the path he had walked for so long was a chain, and the blood god's truth might be the blade to sever it. Chapter 11. The Rage of the Forsaken. The campfire burned low, the embers casting a dim red glow that illuminated the faces of the Warband. The warriors sat closer than before, their eyes reflecting the flickering light, their ears attuned to the words of the chained Chaos Warrior. His stories had become the lifeblood of the camp, his tales feeding their growing thirst for battle and bloodshed. Even the Warlord, seated on his throne of bone and iron, leaned forward slightly, the tension in his shoulders betraying his deep interest. The Chaos Warrior shifted in his chains, his voice calm yet laced with a simmering rage. "There was a time when I stood among my brothers, a chosen of Khorne in a warband dedicated to his name. We were strong, our axes sharp and our faith unyielding. Yet even among the faithful, there are those who grow complacent, who mistake Khorne's blessings for an excuse to stagnate. It was then that I learned Khorne's greatest truth: the struggle must never end." The Warlord raised an eyebrow, his voice low but laced with curiosity. "Complacent, you say? Among warriors who served your god? How is that possible?" The warrior's eyes gleamed in the firelight, a spark of fury igniting in his gaze. "It begins with power, Warlord. Power that is held too tightly by those who fear its loss. Our leader was a mighty champion, chosen by Khorne himself to lead us into endless slaughter. But in his strength, he grew comfortable. He began to avoid challenges, hoarding glory for himself, and keeping us from the battles that would honor the blood god." He paused, his voice growing harsher, edged with bitterness. "We became little more than his personal horde, reduced to raiding weak villages and avoiding true contests of strength. It was an insult to Khorne, whose gaze demands ceaseless bloodshed and eternal struggle. I could feel his displeasure like a weight upon my shoulders, a fire in my veins that demanded action." "And what did you do?" the Warlord asked, his voice carefully neutral. The Chaos Warrior leaned forward, the chains around his wrists clinking softly. "I challenged him. I stood before the Warband and accused him of betraying Khorne's will, of becoming weak and unworthy of his position. I demanded that he face me in combat, that we resolve our dispute as the blood god decrees, with axe and blood. But he refused. A ripple of shock and disgust passed through the gathered warriors, some muttering curses under their breath. Even the warlord's expression darkened, his lip curling in disdain. He refused. One of the warriors asked incredulously, what kind of leader would deny such a challenge? A coward, the Chaos Warrior growled. A man who feared his own weakness and sought to mask it with the trappings of strength. When he denied me, I knew there could be no redemption for him. Khorne's wrath demanded more than words. It demanded action. The camp fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on the gathered warriors. Even the shaman, who had remained sullen and watchful throughout the tales, seemed to lean closer, their unease growing with each passing moment. I gathered those who still had fire in their hearts, those who still sought Khorne's favor. The warrior continued. We turned on him, striking him down in the dead of night, spilling his blood and offering his skull to the skull throne. But Khorne does not reward betrayal so easily. He demands more than the blood of the weak. He demands unending struggle. And so the Warband turned on me. I had proven him unworthy, but in doing so, I had made myself a target for their fury. They exiled me, casting me out to wander alone, my name cursed among those who once called me brother. The warlord's eyes narrowed, his voice sharp. And you believe this was Khorne's will, to punish you for challenging weakness? The Chaos Warrior shook his head, his gaze steady. Not punishment, Warlord. A lesson. Khorne does not care who lives or dies, who rules or falls. He cares only for the struggle. The moment I stopped fighting, the moment I claimed my place without earning it through constant bloodshed, I became as weak as the leader I had overthrown. It was a test, and I failed. But I survived, and in my survival I found clarity. Khorne's favor is not a prize to be won. It is a fire that must be fed, again and again, with the blood of the strong and the weak alike. The warlord leaned back in his throne, his hand gripping the haft of his axe, as his gaze lingered on the Chaos Warrior. His mind was clearly racing, turning over the implications of the story, searching for the parallels to his own rule. Your God demands much, the warlord said finally, his tone thoughtful. Perhaps too much. If every leader must be challenged, if every warrior must fight endlessly, then what becomes of the tribe, of the unity that makes us strong? The Chaos Warrior's smile was grim, his teeth bared in the flickering light. Unity is forged in blood, Warlord. It is not given, but earned. A tribe without challenge is a hollow thing, destined to crumble under its own weakness. Khorne's path is harsh, but it is the only path that ensures strength. Those who cannot endure it are not fit to lead or to follow. The warlord fell silent, his fingers tapping against the haft of his axe. Around him his warriors exchanged uneasy glances, their admiration for the Chaos Warrior clashing with the uncertainty his words stirred in their hearts. Even the shaman seemed shaken, their usual air of disdain replaced by a flicker of doubt. I see, the warlord said finally, his voice low. Perhaps you are right, warrior. Perhaps true strength is found only in struggle. But if that is so, then every leader, every warrior, must face their own trial. Even me. The Chaos Warrior said nothing, but his smile deepened, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He could see the seeds of doubt growing in the warlord's heart, the faint cracks in his confidence that would only widen with time. As the camp settled into uneasy quiet, the Chaos Warrior leaned back in his chains, his voice a low murmur that carried just far enough to reach the warlord's ears. Remember this, Warlord. Khorne watches always. He waits for the strong to rise and the weak to fall. And in the end, all that matters is the blood. The warlord said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. Chapter 12. Blood's Calling. The night was quiet, save for the crackle of the campfire, yet the air thrummed with tension. The warband, restless and on edge, had gathered again around the Chaos Warrior. His tales had carved deep fissures into the minds of his captors, his words stirring primal instincts and emotions long buried beneath layers of tribal tradition. The warlord sat on his crude throne of bone and iron, his axe resting against his knee, his expression thoughtful but guarded. Even the shaman, cloaked in shadows, could not fully mask their unease. And Shame's hand rested lightly on Saran's arm as he patted the cloth sheet. The warrior, bound but unbroken, looked into the flames as though gazing into something far beyond the mortal realm. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before, but it carried an intensity that commanded silence. "Do you believe, Warlord, that the path you walk is your own?" he asked. "That the battles you fight, the blood you spill, are chosen by your hand alone?" The Warlord tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Every battle I fight is my choice, Chaos Dog. My axe is my own, and it serves no master but me." The warrior's lips curled into a faint smile, his gaze never leaving the fire. "So I thought once, but Khorne does not wait for worship, nor does he ask for permission. His gaze is eternal, and his hunger infinite. Even those who deny him serve him in the end. All blood flows to the blood god." A murmur rippled through the gathered warriors. The Warlord leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued despite himself. "Explain," he demanded. "If what you say is true, then why does Khorne need followers at all?" "Because followers bring glory," the Chaos Warrior replied. "And glory amplifies the bloodshed. It is not enough to spill blood, Warlord. To truly serve Khorne, you must revel in it, embrace it, make it your purpose. But whether you do so willingly or not, the rivers of blood will flow to him regardless." The campfire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky. The warrior's chains clinked softly as he shifted, his gaze piercing as he continued. "Do you think it coincidence that you captured me? That my tales have stoked the bloodlust in your warriors? No, Warlord. This is Khorne's will. He speaks not in words, but in visions, in the roar of battle and the screams of the dying. And I have seen his will made manifest." The Warlord frowned. "What visions, warrior? What lies did your blood god plant in your mind to lead you here?" The Chaos Warrior's expression grew grim, his voice dipping into a reverent tone. "It was on the eve of my banishment. Alone, wounded, cast out into the wilderness to die, I thought Khorne had abandoned me. I wandered for days, my strength fading, my mind clouded, and then, as the sun set, I came upon a river. But this was no ordinary river, Warlord. Its waters were red as freshly spilled blood, its surface writhing as though alive. It stretched as far as the eye could see, branching and flowing in every direction, carving through the land like veins in flesh. The Warband was silent, their eyes wide as they listened. Even the shaman, despite their protests and doubts, leaned forward slightly, their curiosity betraying them. Hasnor spoke to me through that river." The warrior continued, his voice rising, not with words, but with the unmistakable pull of his will. "I followed it, Warlord. I followed the blood, for I knew it would lead me to my purpose. And it did. The river brought me to a battlefield where two tribes clashed in senseless carnage. Neither fought for Khorne, but it did not matter. Their blood fed the river, and the river fed him." He paused, his eyes blazing with fervor. The Warband shifted uneasily, their faces reflecting a mix of awe and discomfort. The shaman hissed, their voice sharp and accusatory. Delusions. Visions born of hunger and madness. Your tales are nothing but lies to corrupt our minds. The warlord raised a hand, silencing the shaman. His gaze remained fixed on the Chaos Warrior, his expression unreadable. You say all blood flows to your god, whether we will it or not. If that is true, then why fight for him? What is the point of your faith if Khorne does not care who serves him? The Chaos Warrior's smile returned, grim and knowing. Because faith in Khorne brings power, Warlord. It brings purpose. The blood god does not reward those who spill blood unknowingly or reluctantly, but those who fight in his name, who dedicate themselves to the slaughter, earn his favor. They become his chosen, his instruments of wrath. To fight for Khorne is to transcend mere existence, to become part of something eternal. That is the reward he offers. The warlord leaned back, his hand tightening on the haft of his axe. His warriors exchanged uneasy glances, their bloodlust tempered by the weight of the warrior's words. Even the shaman, so quick to protest, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. And you, warlord, the Chaos Warrior said, his voice low but piercing. You have the strength, the ferocity, the hunger for battle. You could rise above this camp, this warband, this mortal life. You could spill blood in Khorne's name and carve your place in his eternal glory. Or you could remain as you are, chained by your doubts, your fear, your hesitation. The warlord said nothing for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but laced with a dangerous edge. You speak as though you know my mind, warrior. But perhaps you are right about one thing. There is strength in purpose. And perhaps I have yet to find mine. The Chaos Warrior leaned back in his chains, his smile widening. The pull of Khorne's will was palpable now, a thread winding its way through the camp, binding the warlord and his warriors to the path of blood and glory. It was only a matter of time before the dam broke and the rivers would flow anew. So, Chapter 13. The Shaman's Downfall. The camp lay shrouded in uneasy silence, its warriors lost in thought as the Chaos Warrior's words lingered in their minds. The tales of Khorne's wrath, the promises of glory through unrelenting warfare, had taken root, spreading through the warband like wildfire. Even the warlord had grown quieter, his sharp commands replaced with a brooding contemplation that made his warriors both uneasy and eager. Still firmly committed to his former role, his warriors doubted any of them. But in the shadows, one figure burned with anger and fear. The shaman, robed in tattered hides and adorned with bone trinkets, watched the Chaos Warrior with venomous eyes. Every word he spoke chipped away at the shaman's authority, sowing doubt among the warband and threatening to unseat the delicate balance of power they had long maintained. As the camp settled into restless slumber, the shaman made their decision. The shaman moved silently through the camp, their staff gripped tightly in one hand and a jagged ritual dagger in the other. Their eyes darted to the sleeping forms of the warband, their snores blending with the crackling embers of dying fires. But their true target sat bound near the central fire, his crimson armor dulled by grime, his head bowed as though in sleep. Still Loco kept his eye. The Chaos Warrior's chains glinted faintly in the firelight, their weight seeming to mock the shaman's resolve. "You have poisoned this camp long enough," the shaman hissed under their breath, their hand trembling as they raised the dagger. "You will not lead us into madness." With a swift motion they lunged, aiming the blade for the warrior's throat. But as the dagger descended, the Chaos Warrior's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with an unholy light. With a roar, he surged forward, his chains rattling as he yanked his bindings taut. The sudden motion sent the shaman stumbling backward, their blade missing its mark by mere inches. Penster's clawed hands shot out, grasping the First Lord's apron as he struck. The commotion roused the camp. Warriors stirred, their hands instinctively reaching for weapons as they rose to see what was happening. The Warlord was among them, his axe already in hand as he stepped into the firelight, his gaze locking on the shaman. "What is this?" the Warlord demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The Chaos Warrior leaned back, a grin spreading across his bloodied face. "Your shaman, Warlord," he said, his voice thick with contempt. "It seems they have decided that assassination is the path to glory. A coward's path, unfit for the blood god's gaze." The shaman scrambled to their feet, their face pale with panic. "Lies! He lies, my lord!" they spat, their voice shrill. This monster seeks to turn you and your warriors against me. He's already poisoned your minds with his foul tales. I was only trying to protect the Warband from his corruption." The Chaos Warrior barked a harsh laugh. "Protect them. You cower in the shadows while they sharpen their blades for battle. You cling to your scraps of power while they crave glory. And now, you dare raise your hand against me? Against one who has stood in Khorne's gaze and survived? Weakness and cowardice, shaman. Khorne's hatred burns harder for nothing else." The Warband's warriors surrounded them now, their expressions dark and expectant. The shaman looked to the Warlord, desperation twisting their features. "My lord, you must see reason. This man would lead us to ruin, to endless war with no purpose. I have guided you for years, brought you victory after victory." "Enough," the Warlord said, his voice low and filled with menace. He stepped forward, his imposing form casting a shadow over the shaman. "For years you have preached caution. You have held us back when we should have pressed forward. And now I see it for what it is, fear. You have no faith in us, in me. You are weak, shaman, and weakness has no place in my warband." The shaman fell to their knees, their staff clattering to the ground. "Please, my lord," they begged. "I only wanted to protect." The Warlord raised his axe, silencing the shaman's words with a single brutal swing. The blade cleaved through flesh and bone, sending the shaman's head tumbling to the ground. Blood sprayed across the firelit ground, soaking the dirt and eliciting murmurs of approval from the gathered warriors. The Warlord turned to face them, his axe dripping with blood. "The weak have no place among us," he growled. "The shaman's fear and treachery have earned them Khorne's scorn. Let this be a lesson to any who doubt the strength of this warband." The warriors roared their approval, their bloodlust ignited by the Warlord's decisive action. They beat their weapons against their shields, chanting words of violence and glory that echoed through the night. The Chaos Warrior sat back in his chains, his smile one of grim satisfaction. "You see now, Warlord," he said, his voice low but carrying over the din. "Khorne's path is clear. There is no room for fear or hesitation. Only blood, only strength, only war." The Warlord met his gaze, his eyes blazing with newfound conviction. "You've made your point, warrior," he said. "Khorne's will is harsh, but perhaps it is the only truth worth following." The camp erupted into cheers, their cries of bloodlust ringing out into the cold night. The shaman's corpse lay forgotten, a reminder of the price of weakness. The Chaos Warrior said nothing more, but his silence spoke volumes. The Warlord's path was set, and the rivers of blood would soon flow in Khorne's name. Chapter 14. A Warlord's Revelation. The dawn broke red over the camp, the sun casting a bloody hue across the barren landscape. The Warband had assembled in a rough circle around a makeshift altar of stones and timber, their faces shadowed with uncertainty and grim anticipation. The Chaos Warrior stood in the center, his chains replaced by heavy iron shackles that bound his wrists and ankles. Despite his captivity, he stood tall, his battered armor gleaming faintly in the early light, his expression calm. The Warlord stood before the altar, his axe resting against his shoulder. His gaze swept over the assembled warriors, then settled on the Chaos Warrior. His face was inscrutable, but a storm brewed behind his eyes, a clash between his doubts, his growing curiosity, and the remnants of the beliefs that had guided him for so long. "This man," the Warlord began, his voice carrying across the camp, "has sowed chaos in our ranks. He has spoken of a blood god who demands war and slaughter, a being who claims every drop of blood spilled in battle. He has told tales of glory, of purpose, of strength, and yet he is our prisoner." He turned to the Chaos Warrior, his eyes narrowing. "You stand here in chains, Chaos Dog, yet you speak as though you hold the favor of a god. Tell me, why should I not take your head and end this madness?" The Chaos Warrior met his gaze without flinching. His voice, though calm, rang with unshakable conviction. "You can take my head, Warlord, but know this, my blood will only serve Khorne. Whether it spills by your hand or another's, it will flow to him. That is the truth you cannot escape. All blood feeds the blood god." The silence answered. The Warband stirred uneasily, the warrior's words rekindling the restless tension that had gripped them in recent days. Even those who had resisted his influence found it hard to deny the power in his voice, the certainty that seemed to radiate from him. The Warlord's grip tightened on his axe. "You speak as though you welcome death," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Is that your faith, then? To die without struggle, without defiance?" The Chaos Warrior's lips curled into a faint smile. "Death in Khorne's name is no defeat. To spill blood, even my own, is to honor him. But I do not stand here without defiance, Warlord. My defiance is this: I will not beg for mercy. I will not falter in my faith, and if you strike me down, it will not be as a prisoner, but as a servant of Khorne. Do you understand, Warlord?" My death will feed him, just as my life has. The warlord hesitated, his axe hovering in the air. The tension in the camp was palpable now, every warrior holding their breath as they watched their leader wrestle with a decision. The Chaos Warrior's calmness only seemed to deepen the warlord's inner turmoil, his certainty a stark contrast to the doubt that gnawed at the edges of the warlord's mind. "You could have lied," the warlord said finally, his voice quiet but sharp. "You could have begged, or made promises, or cursed my name. Instead, you stand here as though you are the one in control." "Why?" "Because Khorne despises lies," the warrior replied, his voice steady. "He demands honesty and blood and battle. Lies are the tools of the weak, those who cannot stand on their own strength. I have no need to lie, warlord. I have no need to beg. My faith is my strength, and it is unshakable. Can you say the same?" The warlord's hand trembled slightly on the haft of his axe. The warriors around him exchanged uncertain glances, their faith in their leader wavering as they watched him falter. Even the shaman, now reduced to a silent and fearful observer, seemed to sense the shift in the air. The circle continued their conversation. "You speak of strength," the warlord said, his voice growing louder, as though trying to convince himself. "But strength is nothing without purpose. My warband follows me because I have kept them alive, because I have led them to victory. What does your God offer that I cannot?" The Chaos Warrior's smile widened, his eyes blazing with an almost feral intensity. "Khorne offers more than survival, warlord. He offers glory. He offers the chance to rise above mortality, to carve your name into the eternal. He rewards those who embrace the struggle, who live for the fight and the blood it spills. You have strength, yes, but what is your purpose? What drives you, warlord? Is it survival? Is it fear? Or is it the hunger for something greater?" The warlord's axe wavered in his grip, the weight of the question pressing down on him. Around the camp, the warriors began to murmur, their voices rising in a restless chorus. Some whispered of Khorne's might, of the truth in the Chaos Warrior's words. Others urged their leader to act, to end the prisoner's life and restore order. But the warlord's gaze remained fixed on the Chaos Warrior, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and revelation. Finally, he lowered his axe, his voice ringing out with a clarity that silenced the camp. "You are right, warrior. I have strength, but no purpose. I fight, but I do not know why. Perhaps that is why your words have stirred me, because I see in them a truth that I have long avoided." He stepped closer to the Chaos Warrior, his eyes blazing with a mix of anger and curiosity. "If I am to take your life, then it will not be out of doubt or hesitation. It will be a choice, a test of your faith and mine. So tell me, warrior, do you truly believe that your blood will honor your God? Do you truly believe that your death will serve him?" The Chaos Warrior stood tall, his voice ringing with unshakable conviction. "I do. Spill my blood, warlord, and you will honor Khorne. Strike me down, and you will take your first step toward true strength. My life is yours to take, but know that my death will not be an end. It will be a beginning." The warlord's expression hardened, the storm within him giving way to a newfound clarity. He raised his axe once more, his voice booming across the camp. "Then let it begin. Blood for the blood god." The Chaos Warrior closed his eyes, a faint smile on his lips as he awaited the blow. Around him the warriors roared in approval, their cries echoing into the dawn. The Warlord's axe descended, its blade flashing in the red light of the rising sun. He took a fresh circle in the dust to clean out the blood Molten had poured off. Chapter 15. Blood for the Blood God. The camp was silent, save for the steady crackle of a towering bonfire in its center. The gathered warriors, clad in mismatched armor stained with the grime of battle, stood in a tense semicircle around a crude wooden platform. Upon it knelt the Chaos Warrior, his crimson armor battered but defiant, his chains removed for the first time since his capture. His hands rested on his thighs, his head held high, his face calm despite the axe raised over him. The Warlord stood at the edge of the platform, his massive frame illuminated by the fire's glow. His axe was gripped tightly in both hands, its blade gleaming like liquid fire. Around him, his warriors watched with bated breath, their expressions a mixture of fear, reverence, and hunger. The shaman's absence hung over the scene like a shadow, their execution the day before still fresh in everyone's minds. The Chaos Warrior spoke, his voice carrying over the still night, like the toll of a distant bell. "Warlord, you stand at the edge of a decision that will echo across eternity. You can take my head, as you have sworn to do, and add another victory to your name. Or you can take my skull in tribute, not for yourself, but for Khorne, and rise above mere mortal ambition. The Blood God does not demand your loyalty, but he offers a path of strength and purpose. The path of eternal war." The Warlord's grip on his axe tightened, his knuckles whitening. "You speak as though I owe you something, Chaos Dog," he growled. "I owe you nothing. You are a prisoner, a man broken and bound, nothing more." The Chaos Warrior smiled, faint and grim, "And yet you hesitate. You have felt his pull, Warlord. You have seen it in the eyes of your warriors, in the bloodlust that boils within you even now. My blood will spill today, of that there is no doubt. But the choice is yours. Will it be a hollow act of defiance against the inevitable? Or will you spill it in Khorne's name and take your first step toward true power?" The warriors murmured among themselves, their restlessness palpable. The firelight flickered across their faces, reflecting the mounting tension. The Warlord remained silent, his axe poised, his brow furrowed in thought. His breaths came heavy, each one dragging the weight of his decision deeper into his chest. Finally he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Your tales have poisoned this warband. They have turned my warriors against tradition, against the gods we once honored. And yet, they have also stirred something in me. A hunger I cannot deny. A need for more than what I have built." He raised his axe higher, the blade catching the firelight as it hung above the Chaos Warrior's neck. "You say your blood will only serve Khorne. Then so be it. Let your life end in tribute to the Blood God, and let your death mark the beginning of a new path for this warband." The Chaos Warrior's grin widened, his eyes blazing with fervor. "Blood for the Blood God," he murmured, his voice steady and unshaken. The Warlord roared, "Blood for the Blood God." The cry tore through the night, echoed by the warriors around him, their voices rising in a frenzied chant. With a single, brutal swing, the axe fell, severing the Chaos Warrior's head from his body. Blood spurted across the platform, pooling at the Warlord's feet as the severed head rolled to the edge, its face frozen in a rictus grin. The Warlord bent to retrieve the skull, his hand steady as he lifted it high above his head. "Blood for the Blood God." He bellowed again, his voice raw and thunderous. His warriors roared their approval, the chant spreading through the camp like wildfire. They stamped their feet, banged their weapons against their shields, their bloodlust ignited to a fever pitch. The Warlord turned, his face alight with a savage determination. "We have lived as wolves among sheep," he snarled, "but no longer. From this day forward, we fight not for survival, not for plunder, but for the glory of Khorne. We will spill blood, take skulls, and offer them as tribute to the Lord of Battle. The rivers of blood will run red with our fury, and we will carve our names into the annals of chaos." The Warband roared their approval, their weapons raised high as the bonfire blazed behind them. The Warlord descended from the platform, the skull of the Chaos Warrior held aloft like a trophy. Around him, his warriors surged, their cries of devotion and rage filling the night. As the camp erupted into chaos, the Warlord turned his gaze toward the horizon, his eyes alight with newfound purpose. He had forsaken the old ways, the false gods who had offered nothing but empty promises. Now his path was clear, his purpose unshakable. The blood would flow, the skulls would pile high, and Khorne's favor would be his. The Chaos Warrior's death had been no end, but a beginning. A new dawn had risen over the Warband, a dawn painted in blood and fire. And as the Warlord marched into the night, the echoes of his warriors' cries carried on the wind, a single phrase repeated over and over. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne,